Water is dripping into a bucket. No pipes. No well. No tank anywhere in sight. Just curved metal sitting in the middle of drought-cracked land, and water appearing from nowhere. Boone almost walked past it. 3 days ago he almost let that discovery rot in a rusted shed alongside everything else the drought was taking from him. But he didn't. And what he found inside that shed wasn't a machine. It wasn't a miracle. It was a forgotten idea. One that pulls water straight from the sky. No electricity. No pump. No monthly bill. Just physics. And $12. The question that should be sitting heavy in every farmer's mind right now is this. If this method has always worked, why has nobody been talking about it? Welcome back to Earth, Lost Vault and Secret. Hit that subscription button and pick up your writing materials. We are about to unravel another forgotten technique. The dust storm hit before sunrise. Zechariah Boone, 4th generation on the same Jornada Basin land, stepped outside into a wall of brown air and flying grit. He pulled his collar up, squinted hard. The sky looked like rust. He didn't go back inside. He started clearing. 3 hours of hauling broken fence posts and scattered debris, and then his boot caught on something buried under a collapsed tin wall. An aluminum panel. Warped. Curved at the edges like something had pressed it deliberately into that shape. Then another. Then 3 more stacked beneath it. He dragged them into the light. They weren't random scraps. The curve was too consistent. Too intentional. Behind them, wedged between an old irrigation frame and a cracked wooden post, a notebook. Wrapped tight in oilcloth. Dry as a bone. Zechariah peeled the oilcloth back slowly. The handwriting inside was sharp. Precise. Like whoever wrote it believed every word mattered. Dr. Ovid Kesari. Soil Systems Research. 1974. The first page wasn't about soil. It was about air. Zechariah read the opening line once. Then read it again. Slower. The atmosphere above a single acre holds more water than most farms pull from the ground in a full calendar year. He stood there. Wind is still pushing dust across the yard. The sentence didn't make sense at first. Then it started to. He turned the pages carefully. Diagrams appeared. Curved metal sheets mounted on a simple frame. An angle. A trough running along the bottom edge. Droplets illustrated with small arrows, all pointing downward into a container. No motor is drawn anywhere. No electrical connection. Just metal. And gravity. The principle was written in plain language beside each diagram. At night, metal radiates heat faster than the surrounding air. The surface drops below the air temperature. Warm, humid air drifts across it. The moisture hits the cool surface and condenses. The same way cold glass sweats in summer heat. Except this wasn't an accident. This was engineered to happen. Quietly. Every single night. Zechariah set the notebook down on a fence post and stared at the aluminum panels. $12 in bolts and brackets. That's all Dr. Kesari's margin note said about the frame cost. He built it that afternoon. Bent the panels further. Matched the curve in the diagrams as close as he could judge. Aimed the frame toward the open sky. Set a bucket underneath. First night. Almost nothing. A smear of moisture across the metal. Barely a tablespoon. He checked the notebook again before bed. Found a margin note so small he'd skipped it the first time. Most builders fail because the surface isn't curved enough. Flatten it and you lose everything. He went back outside at midnight with a flashlight. Bent the panels harder. His hands were cold. His knuckles scraped the metal edge twice. He reset the frame. Went back inside. Didn't sleep well. Second night, a quarter cup. Maybe a little more. He poured it slowly from the bucket into a glass jar and held it up to the light. But the notebook had promised more than that. And Zechariah Boone hadn't survived 4 generations of this land by accepting a quarter cup of anything. He bent the panels again on the 3rd morning. Pushed the curve until the aluminum complained. set everything back into position, walked away. And when the fourth morning came, still dark, still cold, wind barely moving, Zechariah stepped outside and crossed the yard. He looked down into the bucket. Then he stopped breathing for a second. The bucket was almost full. Zechariah stood over it. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared at water that had no business being there. Sitting in a dented metal bucket on cracked New Mexico earth that hadn't seen real rain in 11 weeks. He dipped 2 fingers in. Pulled them out. Rubbed them together slowly. Real water. Not dew scraped off the grass. Not runoff from somewhere unseen. Water that had condensed, drop by drop, from the night air itself. Because a dead engineer's notebook and $12 worth of bolts said it could. He filled a glass jar. Held it up to the early light. Then he built 5 more collectors before noon. Word moved the way it always moves in drought country. Quiet at first. Then faster than anyone planned. His neighbor across the fence line, a sharp-eyed farmer named Demarion Tull, showed up 3 days later with his arms crossed and his jaw set like a man prepared to be disappointed. He looked at the collectors. Looked at the buckets. Looked at Zechariah. "You catching clouds now, Boone?" Zechariah didn't answer. Just pointed at the nearest bucket. Demarion walked over. Looked in. Said nothing for a long moment. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "That's nothing." It wasn't anything. Every morning each collector produced water. Not irrigation scale. Nobody was flooding fields. But the yield was steady, consistent, and completely free. Seedlings that had been days from dying were drinking again. Livestock troughs that Zechariah had been rationing for 2 weeks were holding water through the afternoon heat. Small things. But in drought, small things are the difference between a farm that survives and one that gets auctioned off by October. Zechariah kept bending more panels. 10 collectors are now scattered along the fence line. Each one angled precisely the way Dr. Kesari's notebook described. Each one was pulling moisture from the air that looked completely dry to the human eye. Then Matthias Cruz arrived. Matthias was 71 years old, walked with a slight lean, and had spent 40 years working agricultural projects across 3 continents. He drove up one Thursday morning, stepped out of a dusty pickup, and studied the collectors for a long time without saying a word. Then he turned to Zechariah. "I saw these in Morocco," he said. "Atlas Mountains. Mid-80s. Zechariah went still. "Whole villages used them," Matthias continued. "Not this exact design, but the same idea. Curved surfaces. Night cooling. Collect gutters. They called it different names depending on the region. But the physics was identical." He paused. Picked up the corner of one aluminum panel. Examined the curve. "This isn't new technology," Matthias said. "This is old technology that got buried." That sentence landed differently than Matthias probably intended. Because Zechariah had been quietly asking himself the same question for days now. Not out loud. Not to anyone. But alone at night, reading Dr. Kesari's notebook again by flashlight. The same question kept returning. If this worked decades ago, and centuries ago in North Africa, why had nobody passed it forward? Matthias had the answer. And it wasn't the answer Zechariah expected. "Scale," Matthias said simply. "Industrial agriculture doesn't have room for quiet solutions. Everything has to be big enough to sell. Big enough to contract. Big enough to justify a pipeline budget." He set the panel down carefully. A curved sheet of aluminum doesn't have a profit margin. So nobody teaches it. Nobody funds it. And within 1 generation, it disappears from memory. Zechariah looked out across his collectors. 10 frames. 10 buckets. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the metal. The drought hadn't broken. The wells were still dropping. The county water board was still sending letters with words like temporary and manageable. But something had shifted on this property. Not the water table. Not the rainfall pattern. something in the understanding of what survival actually required. These collectors weren't going to save every farm in the Jornada Basin. Zechariah never claimed that. But they were doing something that no pump, no pipeline, and no government report had managed to do. They were buying time. And in drought country, time is the only currency that actually matters. He added 4 more collectors that weekend. Then Demarion Tull built 3 of his own. Then a younger farmer 2 miles east started asking questions. The knowledge was moving again. Quietly. The same way the water moved down those curved panels every night. Drop by drop. But what Zechariah didn't know yet, what nobody on that fence line had figured out, was that Dr. Kesari's notebook had a final section. Pages he hadn't reached yet. And the last diagram in that notebook wasn't a collector. It was something else entirely. 6 months passed. The drought didn't. But Zechariah Boone's ranch did something the neighboring properties couldn't manage. They held. Not easily. Not without long days and hard decisions. But the land stayed alive. The seedlings he'd written off in July were producing by September. The livestock operation his grandfather had built was still standing when 3 farms within 20 miles quietly folded. Visitors started showing up at the fence line without calling first. They'd stand there looking at the aluminum panels, catching the early light. Curved. Silent. Waiting for nightfall. Some asked if it was solar. Some thought it was some kind of government experiment. Zechariah always told them the same thing. $12. Old notebook. Bent metal. Most people laughed first. Then they asked where to get the aluminum. Because that's what drought does to a person. It strips away the preference for impressive solutions. Nobody standing in front of a dying crop cares whether the answer looks sophisticated. They care whether it works before morning. And these worked every morning. Demarion Tull expanded to 14 collectors. Matthias Cruz drove out twice more, each time bringing hand-drawn notes from his own years studying desert water systems in West Africa and southern Spain. The knowledge comes together from different directions, different continents, different centuries, all pointing at the same principle. Cool a surface. Let the air do the rest. Zechariah finally reached the final pages of Dr. Kesari's notebook on a quiet October evening. He sat on the porch steps. Read slowly. The last section wasn't diagrams. It was a letter. Written to nobody in particular. Or maybe to whoever found the notebook decades later. Dr. Kesari had written it the year the county told him his research funding was being redirected to deeper well infrastructure. One paragraph stopped Zechariah completely. The solutions that keep people alive during hard years are rarely the ones that get celebrated. They are the ones nobody notices until the other options run out. Build the quiet systems. They outlast everything else. Zechariah read it twice. Then set the notebook down on his knee and looked out across the land his family had worked for 4 generations. The collectors stood in a long row along the fence. Curved aluminum catches the last orange light of the evening. No motors. No monthly bills. No moving parts to replace. Just physics working the same way it worked in the Atlas Mountains. The same way it worked in ancient North African villages. The same way it had been working, forgotten, ignored, buried in oilcloth, right there in that rusted shed the whole time. The drought hadn't broken. But Zechariah understood something now that he hadn't understood 6 months ago. Survival was never about finding one perfect solution. It was about building many small, reliable ones. Wells fail all at once. Pumps burn out all at once. Reservoirs drop all at once. But 10 curved aluminum frames scattered quietly across a property. They don't fail together. They just keep working. Night after night. Asking nothing. Producing something from what everyone else called empty air. Zechariah looked up at the sky. The temperature was already dropping as evening took hold. By morning the buckets would be full again. That thought, the simplest thought imaginable, felt heavier and more powerful than anything the county water board had written him all year. Because the sky had always been offering water. It just took a rusted shed, a dead engineer's notebook, and $12 worth of bolts to remember how to receive it. The most powerful engineering trick on Earth wasn't an invention. It was a memory. And some memories, the ones written in oilcloth and left in dark sheds for the right person to find, they wait as long as they need to. They don't expire. They just wait for someone practical enough, stubborn enough, desperate enough to bend the metal one more time. And see what morning brings.